Goth Ozgood, Audiobooks.
478 by Goth Ozgood. Mark awoke from a terrible nightmare. His forehead was damp with perspiration. His pajamas clung to his body in a way that seemed to deliberately strangle him. Mark was thankful to be awake. He pulled at the collar of his shirt and freed himself from the invisible grip. He sat up and let out a sigh. It was a recurring dream that he had suffered for most of his childhood. In the dream, Mark stood alone in the turret room of the castle, looking out across the Atlantic Ocean. A massive tidal wave, rising up hundreds of feet into the sky, filled the horizon. It was a dreadful, apocalyptic vision to behold. The impending doom and inevitable destruction of the entire east coast of North America. Mark hated the dream. The sounds of a distant mower and the scent of freshly cut grass traveled on the early morning breeze. Mark's bedroom window was open, which was odd, because he distinctly remembered closing it before he had gone to sleep. The trees outside were echoing with mockingbird songs. Mark rolled out of bed and put his slippers on. He shuffled out of his room, went down the hall, and took the back staircase to the first floor. He walked past the creepy old butler's pantry and into the kitchen. Mark had been preparing his own breakfast since he was 4 years old. He grabbed a couple of frozen waffles from the freezer and dropped them in the toaster. He grabbed a bottle of maple syrup, a fork and a butter knife. He pulled open the fridge and revealed a well-stocked, practically overflowing array of food. He grabbed a tub of whipped butter and a gallon jug of orange juice. He placed everything on the counter and grabbed a clean, drinking glass from the dishwasher. He shook the container of orange juice while watching the glowing innards of the toaster. The waffles popped up with a ding. After breakfast, Mark got dressed in his green camouflage pants and a military green t-shirt. The shirt had a skull and crossbones on it, which was wearing a red beret and had a slogan that said, "Mess with the best, die like the rest." Mark had decided to go on an adventure into the woods behind his family's property. He put his jean jacket on and went to find his dog. Prince often slept in the garage on a pile of old blankets. He had his own door that was kept open for him to come and go as he pleased. He was free to roam the estate premises as a guard dog and never left the property without Mark. Prince was very good at guarding the castle. One time he attacked a pair of thieves who attempted to steal the stone lions from the front doorstep. There were trails of blood, and bloody shoes, and bloody footprints, all over the driveway. Prince had gone a bit crazy, and tore into the intruders with berserk enthusiasm. It had been a long time since anything crazy like that had happened, and for the most part, Prince was a happy dog. Mark exited his house through the side door near the kitchen. He stepped out onto a small side porch that had a steep, wooden staircase going down to the landscaping and maintenance area. Prince was already standing at the bottom of the stairs, waiting for Mark. They headed down towards the backyard. Ancient horse chestnut trees and enormous rhododendrons adorned the landscape, Weeping willows and paper birch trees rose from the lush, green grass. Beyond that, stood a large, man-made pond, complete with an artificial waterfall that could be turned on with the flip of a switch. Mark approached one of the paper birch trees. Attached to the white trunk of the tree was a heavy-duty, all-weather, outdoor electrical switch. He flipped the switch and water began cascading down a steep rock face. It marked the edge of the property line. Mark walked along the edge of the pond. Prince followed closely behind. The pond was home to many varieties of ducks and Japanese geese that began quacking and honking as soon as they noticed Mark. They came waddling out of their enclosures, seeking food. It was Mark's job to feed them. The crowd of ducks and geese surrounded Mark. Prince playfully chased one of the smaller geese. Mark shouted, "Get over here!" Prince instantly dropped his head and ceased his activities, returning to Mark's side. Mark filled a bucket from the large bin containing pellets of duck food. Mark began spreading piles of duck feed onto the ground. When he finished, he tossed the bucket back into the bin and headed towards the creek on the far side of the pond. The small creek fed the pond from a natural spring. Mark followed the creek over to Rust Way, a residential street adjacent to the back of a neighbor's property. Prince followed several yards behind. They walked a little way down the residential street and came to a swampy area on the other side. It was a little-known entrance to a sizable expanse of woods, known as Wheelwright Park. Mark had gone exploring near and around the area before, but this time, he was determined to go deeper into the woods. His natural sense of direction and photographic memory came in handy. Mark was very good at navigating through the woods and was able to recognize individual trees, rock formations, and he could even tell what time it was by the position of the sun in the sky. He had learned most of it on his own, through trial and error. On a few occasions, he did almost get lost. It was by pure luck that he found his way out before dark. Emerging from the woods, in an unfamiliar area, on the far side of town, Prince was always able to help Mark find the way back home, whenever he came along. This gave Mark an extra sense of confidence to explore places he had never been before. Getting through the swamp was a bit tricky for Mark. One false move, and he could be knee-deep in muck. Prince on the other hand gave no regard to the swamp and trolloped through the mud much faster than Mark could keep up. Prince made it to the other side, turned, and sat down on the dry forest floor. He watched Mark make his way over the swampy terrain. Mark moved in cautious, exaggerated, slow-motion movements. It was all a matter of stepping in the correct places. Iridescent swirls of mysterious pollution covered the surface of the swamp water. Strange aquatic beetles scuttled around, while swamp insects buzzed through the stagnant air. Mark eventually made it past the swamp. He and Prince took off, walking through the woods for about an hour, in the same direction, before anything began to look unfamiliar. The first unfamiliar area they came to was a large slope in the landscape that went downhill to a horse path in the middle of the forest. Old maple trees and even older pines stood like sleeping giants, as Mark led the way over to the path. The horse path was well maintained and obviously still in use. The odor of somewhat fresh horse manure lingered in the air. They followed the path, and it wasn't long before they found the source of that odor. A pile of dung that Prince refused to leave alone. A frantic sniffing fest gone wild. Prince had never encountered a horse before, and Mark felt an ever so slight twinge of dread when he began to wonder how Prince might react to a horse, or someone riding horseback, for that matter. Mark pushed the thought out of his mind and forged ahead with Prince by his side. Tracks in the shape of horseshoes could be seen in the soft dirt of the path. Prince trotted along, panting and drooling through a giant toothy grin. His long pink tongue poking in and out, rapidly. The path went on for a long while. The only real change in it, being several rolling hills. It was on the fourth hill that Mark heard the distinct sound of horse hooves approaching in the distance. Rather than risk a potentially bad incident, Mark called Prince over to him, and they retreated into the thick of the forest. They headed deeper into the woods, checking out the weird toadstools and unusual mushrooms that grew there. Mark and Prince eventually came to a dense patch of thorns that extended across the entire expanse of the forest. It was like a naturally occurring barbed wire fence that grew up from the ground, 5 yards deep. Thick crimson vines covered in 2-inch thorns stopped them dead in their tracks. There was no way through, and no way around. It was very curious. The forest beyond the thorns was dark as midnight, and the trees were old and twisted. It was visibly darker than the rest of the forest, over near the horse path. The trees were so close together that sunlight could barely enter in some areas. That's when Mark noticed that the tree trunks were carved with hundreds of esoteric symbols. Every tree as far as the eye could see had some kind of hand-carved symbol on it.
Goth Ozgood, audiobooks.